The perfect season is still alive for BYU football. BYU takes down Iowa State 41-27. This is your postgame show here on Cougar Tracks, coming to you from Ames, Iowa, site of today's game where the Cougars come back from 17-7 down, and they storm back to a 14-point victory over Iowa State. Going to unpack everything that transpired in this game as BYU finds a way. They dig deep to get the victory, and that was one of my keys to a victory for BYU, was just find a way to get it done. I didn't expect style points potentially with more than 40 points and a 2-touchdown victory. Still, when BYU was down 17-7, and then they lose LJ Martin due to an injury, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be the day where BYU season, or at least game, where the perfect season comes to an end. And the prognosticators who looked at BYU as an underdog, despite being an undefeated team and knocking on the door of the top 10 rankings, they've been validated. It's going to be Iowa State's day here at Jack Trice Stadium. Pump the brakes. That was not the case as BYU found a way to get it done, and Bear Bachmeier was brilliant. 307 passing yards for Bear. Only the second time in his BYU career, 8 games in, that he eclipses the 300-yard mark. There was a BYU sports information director who noted that Iowa State hasn't given up 300 passing yards in around 21 games. So it's not very often that Iowa State and a Matt Campbell team is giving up that level of production through the air. And then when you add to the fact that LJ Martin was out and BYU kind of became one-dimensional, that makes the passing performance of Bear Bachmeier, a true freshman, only 19 years old, that more impressive for BYU. There were just so many things to unpack from this game for BYU in this one. Early on, though, it was not pretty. First play of the game, Iowa State pops off a 75-yard touchdown pass. Rocco Becht completes it to Eskildson, and you're thinking, goodness gracious, that is a brutal start. We know that BYU is excellent when they score first, and they're good at responding. They've done that quite a few times this season when down. But to give up the first play, and keep in mind, Eskildson, number 9 for Iowa State, he was wide open. Faletau Satuala had to come over and cover at the end, and Faletau in the postgame kind of took blame for that, but I really don't fault him. I think that was just BYU had a miscue, and Iowa State capitalized, and they got on the board early. And the scoring just continued, and Iowa State was moving with ease. Now, Iowa State, though, despite the 17-7 lead, they left some points on the board. There was a pass to Carson Hansen from Rocco Becht that sailed over him. He was wide open. If that's on the money, that's going for 6. And then they also had a spot where they settled for a field goal. So Iowa State kind of left some points on the board, and that proved costly in this one as BYU hung around. And what settled in for BYU was Logan Latui, the interception. Max Alford comes in with the pressure on Rocco Becht. It was announced over the press box PA system that Keanu Tanavasa got the tip on that pass. I'll have to go back and rewatch the film on that. I was trying to watch it on my iPad inside Jack Trice Stadium, but Max Alford was bringing the pressure, and then Logan Latui right there, Johnny on the spot, and Rocco Becht throws a bad ball facing pressure from Alford. Logan Latui picks it off. And that changed the fortunes of the game for BYU. Now, in the moment, I will say, I thought, okay, Iowa State, they had a blip on the radar, but it seems like there's not much that BYU's defense is doing to slow down Iowa State's offense. And that was kind of proven right as the next drive for Iowa State, they score a touchdown, and it's 24-10. But still, BYU was able to, kind of settle in, get the nervousness, the post-Utah win, letdown, hangover, whatever you want to call it. Hangover is probably not the best word for BYU. Still, it felt like there was a little bit of a carryover from that rivalry win that lingered into Ames. And maybe you could chalk it up to day game. I don't really look at that. I think that's a thing of the past for this crew. But they just kind of settled the nerves a little bit as they made a big play. And Latui coming up with that pick changed BYU's fortunes. And keep in mind, in that spot, again, LJ Martin's out for the game. And LJ suffers an injury on the final play of the first quarter, and it looked like he lowered his shoulder and he hurt his shoulder. He was kind of grimacing a bit. BYU, of course, didn't have any official word on the specifics of the injury. When Kalani was asked in the postgame, he really kind of danced around the injury and said, yeah, we're concerned and whatnot, worried. But, when a guy leaves early for the game, yeah, we're concerned, but really didn't get into the nuances and maybe timeline potentially of LJ. But to get that moment, just kind of, okay, take a breath. Everything's going to be okay. And everything clearly was okay for BYU. BYU in this game, speaking of takeaways, +4 in turnovers, and then also factor in the turnover on downs later in the second half. BYU was excellent in the turnover margin, and that's been an area where BYU has not been winning much lately. And in this one, they got it done. They pick off Rocco Becht 3 times, and then the special teams fumble. Well, not fumble, it was touch the foot of the Iowa State player, number 5, and Maury Bamba's on the spot to recover that thing. Kevin Doe was kind of battling that Iowa State player on special teams, number 5, and then Maury Bamba recovers the fumble. And that had a nice, generous roll, that punt from Sam Vanderhaar, it just kept going and going and going. And Kevin Doe was battling with that Iowa State player, and then hit the back of his foot, hits it, and pops up, and Maury Bamba's right there to recover it. That was huge. So BYU ends up +4. And that's significant, too, because these are two teams that rely on their physicality. They want to run the football, and they got to win the turnover margin. They rely heavily on that stat. And when you win the turnover margin, if you're BYU, more times than not, you're going to win these football games. And it's so great for BYU that you've got a quarterback, albeit only a freshman, but still, he takes care of the football. Bear Bachmeier ends up 22 of 35, 307 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks, 63% completion rate in this game for Bear Bachmeier. I thought he was excellent in this contest. And then rushing yards, he was the leading rusher in the game, 12 carries, 49 yards, 4.1 yards per carry for Bear Bachmeier. I mean, what else can you say about this guy? This is a special quarterback that BYU has. To be in a spot where you're 8-0, Kalani was asked in the postgame if he expected to be here, and, he's like, yeah, of course I did. I mean, no one expected this. And to go 8-0 and to really feel like you are a better team than last year, I think BYU fans and a lot of people said Bear could be better than Jake Retzloff. But it was still just this case of, is he going to have some dips as a true freshman? And I always go back to what Kalani said in fall camp, and he said, well, what if a true freshman doesn't have those, mistakes? Bear is a guy that they believed from camp was someone that would avoid those mistakes. And because Bear is not making mistakes, he has put BYU in a spot where they're 8-0, and it's pretty impressive to see. I thought some of his throws, too, I think what's so impressive about Bear, too, is some of the passes he completes to guys like Chase Roberts and Parker Kingston, who continue to shine. Both of those guys end up with more than 100 receiving yards in this game. Chase Roberts, 8 catches, 128 yards, 9 targets. 7 catches for Parker Kingston, 13 targets, 133 yards, 2 touchdowns for Parker. What's impressive is that Bear throws it in spots where these guys can get upfield and make plays. BYU's receivers as a whole, 131 yards after the catch. So it's not all on Bear Bachmeier to pick up those yards. Yes, it ends up in his final stat numbers to get that 300 yards, but you take away the 131, that's 176 in the air, and then those guys are giving him an extra 131. It's really impressive. Chase Roberts had a big yards after catch moment, 61 yards after the catch for Chase. It just helps the cause. It's, again, complimentary football. It's not glamorous. BYU is never going to be the Vegas darling. They're never going to be the darling of college football, but they play complimentary football where they help each other out. They do their cliche 111th, and it continues to work for this team. I will say, though, for BYU, the ceiling, I think, gets a little bit lowered without LJ Martin, depending on his timeline. This bye week comes at a perfect time for BYU. I do feel like the ceiling gets lowered, but for this group, in a spot where you're down without LJ, and to grind it out and to dig deep and find a way to get it done. It was really an impressive performance. Some other highlights from this game to me, and keep in mind, too, after the LJ injury, he leaves the game. He goes to the locker room. BYU's drive after LJ, suffers that injury, it ends in a punt, and they have an illegal formation on that punt. So, again, everything's going sideways for BYU. But then BYU gets the interception with Logan Latui. The next drive, Will Farron boots a 50-yard field goal. Underrated in this game. It's not being discussed much, but big game Bill showing up for the Cougars with a 50-yard boot to get this thing to 17-10 with 8:54 remaining. Iowa State then responded. Carson Hansen, he returned to action after an injury. He was really good. Hansen ended up with 16 carries, 152 yards, and 2 touchdowns. One of those touchdowns to put Iowa State up 24-10. That was grown man football. I mean, that was physicality. He was even knocking over his own Iowa State offensive lineman. I love the way that guy plays. And even Abu Sama, who Cougar fans are very well aware of, he had 9 carries for 63 yards in this game. But over the course of the game, BYU's defense that's been really good this year started to settle in. And they only end up allowing 184 yards on the ground to Iowa State. Now, I know that's a big number. It's pretty big, and it's the 5th consecutive week where BYU's rush defense gives up more than 150 on the ground. But from where it started in the first half, 184 feels pretty good for BYU, because then in the second half, Iowa State was playing catch-up, and they had to turn to the air. They end up with 311 passing the football with Rocco Becht, but the 3 picks, that really kind of washed out a lot of the production through the air, and they were playing catch-up late in the game for the Cougars. I also thought, too, something that's got to be cleared up for BYU, their receivers. The stats are great for these receivers. Got to clean up the false starts. 2 consecutive weeks where Parker Kingston's had a false start. Chase Roberts, he also had a false start. That's got to end from the receivers going forward. So something to kind of tighten up if you're Kalani Sitake, Fesi Sitake, and these receivers to kind of fix and not put yourself behind the sticks. As a team, BYU ends up 8 penalties for 57 yards. Iowa State, 5 penalties, 39 yards. They didn't have their first penalty until, I believe, late in the third quarter. They went a long stretch. So when they built up their lead, it was pretty clean football by the Cyclones, who, again, as I talked in my preview show, they had only 13 penalties through the first 5 games. In the previous 2, they had a combined 15. They tack on another 5 as they now extend their losing streak to 3 games this season. Iowa State drops to 5-3 overall. BYU, of course, now 8-0 this season and riding high. I thought the touchdown grabs from Parker Kingston were really impressive. It's a 2nd and goal, and Kingston hauls in that grab to make it 24-17 with 25 seconds remaining, and despite everything that had been going on for BYU, to get that touchdown grab, it just felt like, okay, BYU's got a chance here, and the strategy to always defer on winning a coin toss, that's always great, because then they get the ball to start the second half, and then the momentum continued for the defense too. Anisi Purcell, he closes out the first half with a huge sack, and Anisi continues to play some good football. Remember, 2 weeks ago against Arizona, Purcell was out against Arizona, and his return was huge for BYU. The defensive line as a whole, 4 sacks on the day. Purcell gets 1 from the interior, and then the defensive ends get 3. How about that for these BYU D ends? Bodie Schoonover, 2 sacks. And then Viliami Puha, he gets his first sack this season as well. Huge productive day for BYU's defensive linemen. But they go into the halftime locker room down 24-17. And again, you're sensing, I'm up at the press box at Jack Trice Stadium, and I'm thinking to myself, BYU's got momentum. Despite the deficit and LJ's out, that was a little bit leery because, again, can they win being somewhat one-dimensional? But I thought there was a tangible momentum on both sides of the ball being built. Because in the first half, BYU's defense, Iowa State was just leaning on them. I mean, physically overwhelming BYU. And that surprised me. And that's something that's got to be addressed. You cannot have these slow starts all the time and think you're going to always escape. You cannot do that. When you face Texas Tech, if you get to a Big 12 championship, it's going to bite you at some point. And without LJ, for whatever time frame that's going to be, You can't afford to have slow starts. You just can't. In this spot, it worked out okay, great. But going forward, you got to get on the right side of things and score first. That worked for you against Utah. You got to continue that trend going forward by getting off to quicker starts, because it will bite you at some point this season. Because the schedule, as we know, Texas Tech, TCU, Cincinnati, that 3-game stretch is going to be a gauntlet. It's going to be a difficult road. So BYU's not completely out of the weeds to say, hey, punch your tickets to Arlington. But definitely this win got BYU in a position where you're thinking they got a little bit of margin for error to work with now, and they got some odds where they could really get to the Big 12 championship game this season. BYU opens up the third quarter with a Will Ferrin 27-yard field goal. Underrated thing here, Preston Rex kind of steps into the spotlight, and I thought Rex, considering all the circumstances, did okay. 6 carries, 17 yards for Preston Rex. He had a long of 9 yards. I thought some of his blitz pickup blocking did a nice job too, which that's promising. You got to be a blocker, but I still worry about this running back unit without LJ. And they go as far as LJ will take them, but still, I think Rex and then Enoch Nawahine, too, even late, moving the pile late in the game in the fourth quarter. Some promising signs to kind of build on, depending on what that outlook's going to look like heading into Texas Tech coming up in 2 weeks. Underrated, too. I've talked a lot about LJ Martin, but Sialia Serra leaves the game early in this one, and Max Alford steps in for Serra. The Fox broadcast reported that Serra was dealing with a little bit of arm pain. He was in the medical tent for a long time in that first half, a long time. And then he comes back out. He was still in his pads, and then he got on the helmet, and then he quickly goes back into the medical tent, and then ultimately in street clothes. I think back to the Arizona game, he got a little bit shaken up in his arm. I think it was left arm. Again, we'll have to figure out if it's the same sort of deal, but something to monitor there, because Alford at first kind of struggled, and it looked like, oh man, this is a situation where BYU's a little bit lost and their head spinning, but Alford did adjust and kind of settled in. But, Sialia Serra, Che Bryant Strother, it's getting magnified, these injuries mounting up for BYU. This bye comes at a huge time for BYU. Then you saw a little bit later in the third quarter that huge Chase Roberts, 42 yards after the catch. That was big for BYU, and that spot, I thought that was really impressive. He got to the 42-yard line, a gain of 21 yards, which really got BYU moving. And then Bear Bachmeier caps off that drive with a 9-yard touchdown run, and it was BYU's first lead. 4:33 to go in the third quarter, and BYU suddenly has a lead. And I think Jack Trice Stadium was kind of shell-shocked. Like, what are we watching here? How did this happen so quick where BYU suddenly has a lead? And then the next drive, Iowa State pops up big run. And you're thinking Hanson's going to get Iowa State back in front quickly. Not so fast. Therian Alexander III, what a huge underrated moment by him. Touchdown saving tackle that ended up being a 65-yard run down to the BYU 10-yard line, sets up a 1st and goal. But instead of 6, Iowa State's got to go earn that 6, and they didn't. They moved back, and they were forced to ultimately settle for a field goal. This is how it ends up after that Carson Hansen 65-yard run that was stopped by Therian Alexander in his effort. BYU gets a tackle for loss by John Talmoy-Peau. Keanu Tanavasa draws a hold on 2nd and 11, and then 2nd and goal on the BYU 21. Chase Soule was wide open, but Beck kind of sailed it a little bit, so he lands. Soule catches it, but he lands out of bounds, so BYU escapes that. 3rd and goal on the 21, fumble on the snap, so that results in a 5-yard loss. Iowa State recovers, and then Conradi, he has to boot a field goal. He makes it, but still, 3 and a tie ball game feels so much better than trailing once again. That was huge, and Therian Alexander, give him his flowers for that moment, that effort too, and you saw the speed to track down Hansen. Thought that was a huge moment in this game for BYU. Something that has to be corrected, and look, there's not many things I ever say to Will Ferrin that he's got to correct. He's big game Bill. Kickoffs out of bounds. Got to fix that. 2 consecutive ones. giving Iowa State field position starting at the 35-yard line. Iowa State had one as well. Kind of crazy, weird game how that happened a handful of times in this one. Both of these teams were not clean by any stretch of the imagination in this contest, but that's something that's got to get fixed for Will going forward. Very strange to see that happen because, again, he's been so automatic. It's hard to get nitpicky with him, but still, that will be something that has to get fixed going forward for the Cougars. Because, again, it was back-to-back. That just can't happen. But after the first Will Ferrin kick out of bounds, Faletau Satuala, pick six, basically shuts the door down on Iowa State winning this football game. The previous drive, BYU comes up with a touchdown. Parker Kingston, the ball kind of sailed. Bear Bachmeier sells it, and it looked like, this could be intercepted by Trey Bell. Parker Kingston comes up with it, and BYU leads 34-27, and then kickoff out of bounds. They start on the 35, doesn't matter. Faletau Satuala picks it off, and BYU suddenly is up 41-27 with 13:40 remaining, and that was it. I mean, that was the game, and everything for Iowa State from that point forward was completely deflated, and BYU was rolling and flying high from there. I loved what I saw from Evan Johnson in the fourth quarter. He had a big tackle on Carson Hansen. That was a good play. There was a moment, too. Iowa State had some real miscues. And again, BYU capitalized, but they left some opportunities where Iowa State guys were open, and Becht was not completely accurate. It was 3rd and 10 on the BYU 23. Aiden Flora, number 21 for Iowa State, wide open. Becht Becht threw it to him, but Flora dropped it. I mean, how does that happen? It sets up a 4th and 10, and Therian Alexander on the spot once again, covering number 9 for Iowa State. Eskildson, Therian Alexander forces the pass breakup, and it ends up on a turnover on downs. I think the TV broadcast said that it was probably a PI. Again, I'll have to go rewatch that to see exactly, but hey, Trey gets it done. He was battling and competing and forced a turnover on downs, and BYU takes over. They go 3 and out. But Iowa State on the next drive, they're moving down the field. They had a touchdown run, but then a holding negated that touchdown run. So nothing was working for Iowa State, and ultimately that's how the game ended. Late in the game, Preston Rex did get a little bit nicked up. He went into the medical tent, was kind of walking gingerly on the sideline. Did see him interact with fans in the post-game celebration on the field, but huge win. BYU gets it done 41-27 over Iowa State. There's just so much to kind of unpack. You look at the final numbers. BYU, 410 total yards. Iowa State, 495. Passing for BYU, 307 to 311 for Iowa State. 103 rushing yards for BYU, 184 for Iowa State. Penalties, 8 for 57 for BYU, 5 for 39 for Iowa State. First downs, Iowa State had 24 first downs. BYU only 17. I liked, BYU I thought was a lot more efficient on third downs this week compared to the Utah game, 6 of 15. Iowa State not the greatest, 5 of 11, sub 50%. You like that for Jay Hill's defense. BYU, how about this? Fourth downs, 3 of 3, stepping up on money downs when you're getting aggressive, taking shots. BYU delivered. On the flip side, Iowa State was 1 of 3. Total plays, Iowa State had 70 total plays, BYU 64. I think in the first half, there was one stretch where BYU only had 20 plays, and Iowa State had 34 plays, and 20 of which were in BYU's side of the field. It was a total advantage for Iowa State in that game. But again, BYU navigated those waters and came out on top with a huge victory over the Cyclones. Time of possession, 32 minutes for Iowa State, 27:50 for BYU. And again, the sacks were huge. The turnovers were huge. 6 tackles for loss for BYU, 3 for Iowa State. And some of the guys that got those tackles for loss for BYU, Satuala, Jack Kelly, Max Alford. Bodie Schoonover, he had 2 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. Huge career day for Bodie Schoonover. We've been talking about him for years. He had his career moment at BYU, and it was fitting because it was on a day where former BYU D-end, a guy that Bodie was learning from for years, Tyler Batty, was here at the game with his wife Elena. made the drive or flew down from Minneapolis because obviously the Vikings, they played on Thursday night. So opportunity for Batty to come down and check out his alma mater in action nearby because Minneapolis is just north here of Ames. And he was there on the sideline. Maybe he gave an inspired pregame or halftime speech when BYU was trailing and looking to get some physicality. Not saying that was the case, but would be fun because that was Batty's MO when he was a player for the Cougars. But huge day for BYU. Leading tackler was Faletau Satuala once again. Tanner Wall had 9 tackles. Jack Kelly, 7 tackles as well. The Cougars now look ahead to endless possibilities for this team. You know, they're 8-0. They're going into their second bye week. Kalani said that they're going to approach the bye week differently because sports scientists told them that way. It's science. It's science, I tell you. Kalani was asked a follow-up. What does the science tell you, Kalani? He just said, well, that's why we have a competitive advantage. We're not going to tell you. Okay. Maybe we'll have to talk to Dr. Skylar Main. It's science. The sports scientists are holding it down, leading BYU to this amazing run. I do think they play a big role. You know, BYU's injury report has been kind of light, the availability report, but they have been pretty clutch for BYU this season. And all the mapping out of this schedule, it has worked out quite nicely for the Cougars. So I'm curious to see, you know, what adjustments and tweaks they do make to this bye week as they gear up for an Iowa State team that is really good. And Iowa State is, you know, I think one of the best teams in college football this year. They hammered Oklahoma State today, 42-0. Oklahoma State is just awful. So that's nothing awe-inspiring. But, you know, Texas Tech next week has Kansas State, who hammered Kansas. That's going to be a good game in Manhattan. So that's going to be a good test for Tech. BYU kind of sits back, gets healed up, and gets ready for that trip to West Texas to take on the Red Raiders. We'll probably find out the kickoff time, I would assume, on Monday, unless it gets a 6-day designation. We'll see on that for BYU and Texas Tech. But these are good times for BYU football. I mean, you think about this BYU program, 8-0, and the nation continues to just think they're a fraud. And I think this BYU program really relishes just say, hey, keep saying we're an underdog. They're going to be an underdog against Texas Tech. Regardless of what happens between Tech and K-State, BYU is going to be an underdog. I would probably say 6.5, maybe 7-point underdog against Tech, especially with LJ Martin's status kind of in limbo. They're going to be a touchdown underdog, I would assume at least, heading to Lubbock. So bring it on. I mean, the underdog spots continue to be a space where just BYU thrives. And I think they enjoy it. And you keep placing this underdog mentality on BYU, they will make you pay. And for whatever reason, the sharps, the wise guys, they cannot figure out this BYU team, and BYU continues to prove them wrong. It's been a great day here in Ames at Jack Trice Stadium. I had a great time covering it. I thought the atmosphere here at Iowa State was really awesome. I thought it was the best tailgating scene that I've witnessed in my travels in the Big 12. Far and away, the best tailgating. The RV lot was loaded. Tons of Iowa State fans, flags, pregame. I mean, they were getting loaded up on Friday night into Saturday morning. Energetic crowd. They were ready to see their Cyclones in action. And I thought BYU fans, not as big of a crowd as we've seen on other road games for BYU in our travels of the Cougars, but still, they made their voices heard with BYU chants when the moments kind of caused for that, and you could sense that the momentum was building. BYU fans, they know the moments to drop that BYU. They know when the perfect time calls for those opportunities, and they kind of take over a stadium, and it just kind of blows away fan bases where you think, how on earth does this team from Provo, Utah have so many fans in Ames, Iowa? Probably blows them away because I can't imagine there's many fan bases in this league that show up to Ames. Kind of a tricky spot to get to, but BYU fans always find a way. I don't know what the official number was of Cougar fans. I'd say maybe 2,000 to 3,000. I mean, it was pretty light compared to what we've seen in the past, but still, considering that this Iowa State fan base, they buy their tickets, I thought it was a pretty impressive showing by BYU fans nonetheless. Cougs get it done, 41-27. And that's going to do it for this edition of the BYU football postgame here on Cougar Tracks. Make sure to subscribe to Cougar Tracks and KSL Sports YouTube. Like this video, get the notification bells, and leave a 5-star rating on the podcast audio feeds wherever you get your podcast. Appreciate all of you. I'll be back on Monday with a new edition of the show, giving some final thoughts on this win over Iowa State and getting you ready for the bye week and then BYU basketball, as well as the Cougars tip off their season just around the corner. It's an exciting time. Crossover season is here for BYU football and BYU basketball. Talk to you next time here on Cougar Tracks. It's powered by KSL Sports.